I died listening to my husband whisper promises to his first love over the phone while my crushed car bled out into the freezing snow. But the universe doesn't like unfinished business. I opened my eyes to the smell of hairspray and white roses. It was my wedding day. In 10 minutes, the man I loved was going to abandon me at the altar for her. But this time, I wasn't going to cry. I was going to let him walk. And then I was going to marry his billionaire boss. The air tasted like setting spray and panic. Clara, honey, are you breathing? My eyes snapped open. The blinding ring light of the makeup vanity burned my retinas. I gasped a ragged, ugly sound. My hands flying to my chest expecting to feel shattered ribs and the warm, terrifying spread of my own blood. Instead, my fingers met the delicate French lace of a Vera Wang gown. I looked in the mirror. Staring back at me was a 25-year-old woman. Flushed, perfect, and terrifyingly alive. The scars from the windshield glass were gone. The exhaustion of a 5-year miserable marriage hadn't yet etched itself into the corners of my eyes. I'm alive, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Emma, my maid of honor, laughed nervously adjusting a hairpin in my elaborate updo. Well, I'd hope so. You're getting married in 20 minutes. Nerves are normal, but don't pass out on me now. Julian would have a heart attack. Julian. The name sent a violent shudder down my spine. Memories of my past life rushed in like a dam breaking. I remembered this day vividly. June 14th. In exactly 5 minutes, Julian Prescott, the man I had worshipped since college, would burst into this bridal suite at the Plaza Hotel. He would look panicked. He would tell me that Olivia Jenkins, his childhood friend, his sick first love, had collapsed. He would promise to be right back. He wouldn't come back. In my past life, I stood at the altar alone for 2 hours, humiliated in front of 300 guests. I forgave him. Of course. I always forgave him. I spent the next 5 years playing the understanding wife, shrinking myself to accommodate Olivia's endless emergencies. My life ended on a snowy highway driving to fetch Olivia's favorite takeout because she was feeling blue while Julian was at her apartment holding her hand. A sharp knock on the heavy oak door snapped me out of the nightmare. Clara, are you decent? The door swung open, and there he was. Julian. He looked exactly as he had in my memories. Tall, sharply dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. His sandy hair perfectly styled. But his face was pale and his hands were trembling. He was holding his phone like a lifeline. Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm. I didn't feel the heart-fluttering adoration I used to feel. I just felt an icy, crystalline clarity. What's wrong? It's Olivia. He blurted out, unable to meet my eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, ruining the stylist's work. Her roommate just called. She collapsed. They think it's her heart condition acting up again. They're rushing her to Mount Sinai right now. In the past, this was the moment I started crying. This was the moment I begged him to send his brother, to call her parents, to stay with me just for the ceremony. Instead, I stood up smoothing the front of my silk gown. Oh no, I said, infusing my voice with a flat, practiced concern. That sounds serious. Julian blinked, momentarily thrown off by my lack of hysteria. I have to go to her. Clara. She's terrified. She doesn't have anyone else. She has her parents. She has doctors. Emma interjected, stepping forward, her face flushed with outrage. Julian, you are getting married in 15 minutes. You cannot leave. You don't understand. Emma. Julian snapped. He looked back at me, his expression shifting into that manipulative, pleading look he had perfected. Clara, please. You know how fragile she is. I'll just go make sure she's stable, and then I'll come right back. We can push the ceremony back an hour. Please. Just trust me. I walked slowly towards him. I looked into the eyes of the man who would literally lead me to an early grave. I completely understand. Julian. I said softly. You do. He exhaled a massive sigh of relief, reaching out to cup my cheek. I smoothly stepped back, avoiding his touch. Of course. If Olivia needs you, you should go. I smiled a chilling, dead-eyed smile that he was too self-absorbed to notice. Don't worry about the wedding. Just go to her. You are the best woman in the world. Clara. I swear I owe you my life, he said, already turning toward the door, typing frantically on his phone. I love you. I'll be back before you know it. The door clicked shut. Emma stared at me, her mouth hanging open. Have you lost your absolute mind? He just left you on your wedding day for another woman. I know, I said, walking over to my vanity and picking up a tube of crimson lipstick. I carefully applied it, watching my reflection. But he's not coming back. Emma. And I have a wedding to attend. I don't have much time. If memory served me right, the VIP guests were currently mingling in the Astor Library down the hall, enjoying pre-ceremony scotch. Among them was the real reason Julian had fought so hard to book the plaza, his boss, Alexander Cole, CEO of Cole Enterprises, a ruthless venture capitalist, and a man notorious for his cold, calculating demeanor. He was 32, aggressively handsome in a sharp-jawed, intimidating way, and possessed a net worth that made Julian's trust fund look like pocket change. In my past life, Alexander had fired Julian 2 years into our marriage because he kept missing board meetings to cater to Olivia. I picked up the heavy skirt of my dress and marched out of the bridal suite. Clara, where are you going? Emma hissed, chasing after me in her teal chiffon dress. To secure my future, I replied without looking back. I ignored the gasps of the event coordinators as the bride casually strolled down the ornate hallways before the music had even started. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the Astor Library. The room was quiet, smelling of old paper, leather, and expensive cologne. Standing by the window, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler, was Alexander Cole. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. He turned as the doors clicked shut, his dark eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on me. Miss Adams, Alexander said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down my arms. It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony, though I am not the groom. No, you're not, I said, walking straight toward him. I didn't stop until I was only a few feet away, close enough to smell the bergamot and cedarwood radiating off him. The groom has just vacated the premises. He ran off to play white knight for his sick friend. Alexander's expression remained entirely impassive, but there was a flicker of dark amusement in his eyes. Prescott always was a liability. I assumed his personal life was as mismanaged as his quarterly reports. So he abandoned you. He thinks he's coming back. He won't. I tilted my chin up, refusing to let him see an ounce of vulnerability. Mr. Cole, I know you are currently fighting a proxy war with your uncle over the majority shares of Cole Enterprises. That made him freeze. The tumbler stopped swirling. The amusement vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp intensity. How do you know about that? I know a lot of things. I lied smoothly, leaning on the corporate gossip Julian used to complain about in my past life. I also know your late grandfather's will stipulated that you only inherit his remaining 15% voting block, the block that guarantees your absolute control of the company, if you are married by your 33rd birthday, which is next month. Alexander set his glass down on a nearby table. He stepped closer to me, his sheer physical presence overwhelming. You are remarkably well informed for a woman who was just left at the altar. I prefer to think of myself as a free agent, I countered, holding his gaze. You need a wife, Mr. Cole. A respectable, educated woman with a clean background who won't embarrass you, won't demand your time, and understands the concept of a business transaction. You need someone immediately to shut down the board's concerns about your stability. And you need, he prompted, his voice dropping an octave. I need to not be the punchline of tomorrow's high society gossip, I said firmly. I need Julian to walk into his office next week and realize that the woman he threw away is now the wife of the man who holds his entire career in the palm of his hand. I want to be Clara Cole. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Alexander studied my face, his eyes dropping to my lips, then back to my eyes. He was looking for a crack, a sign of hysterical grief or impulsive madness. I gave him nothing but cold, diamond-hard resolve. Slowly, the corner of his mouth curved into a dangerous smirk. I always thought Prescott was punching above his weight with you. Alexander murmured. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. The ceremony begins in 5 minutes. Are you entirely certain about this? Clara, if you take my name, there is no backing out when you calm down tomorrow. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Alexander. He extended his arm toward me. Then shall we? I believe we have a wedding to attend. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and soft candlelight. 300 of New York's elite sat in gilded chairs, whispering in hushed, impatient tones. At the very front sat Eleanor Prescott, Julian's mother, wearing a scowl and a dress that was inappropriately close to white. I knew she was aware of Julian's absence. She had always hated me, preferring Olivia's old money pedigree, and was likely thrilled her son had run off. The string quartet struck up the first chords of Pachelbel's canon in D. The heavy double doors swung open. The murmurs instantly died down, replaced by a collective intake of breath. I stood at the threshold, my veil pulled back to reveal my face clearly. But it wasn't my dress that had the crowd gasping. It was the man walking beside me. Alexander Cole stepped into the light, his hand resting firmly on the small of my back. He didn't look like a substitute groom. He looked like a king claiming his throne. His dark gaze swept over the crowd, daring anyone to speak a word of objection. Breathe, Alexander murmured near my ear, his voice a steady anchor in the surreal madness of the moment. Head high, Mrs. Cole. I squared my shoulders and walked. As we glided down the aisle, the whispers erupted like wildfire. Is that Alexander Cole? Where is Julian? What on earth is happening? I locked eyes with Eleanor Prescott as we passed the front row. The smug satisfaction on her face had melted into sheer unadulterated horror. She gripped her pearl necklace, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She looked from me to the billionaire CEO of her son's company, her brain entirely short-circuiting. We reached the altar. The priest, a family friend of the Prescotts, looked utterly bewildered. He leaned in adjusting his microphone. Clara, my dear, where is Julian? Before I could speak, Alexander stepped forward, his tone polite but laced with an authority that left no room for argument. Julian was unfortunately called away by an emergency he deemed more important than his own wedding. Clara and I have decided not to let this beautiful evening or this stunning venue go to waste. You may begin the ceremony, Father. The priest stammered, looking at Eleanor for help, but Eleanor was frozen in shock. I said, Alexander repeated softly, you may begin. The priest swallowed hard and opened his book. The vows we exchanged weren't the sickly sweet, naive promises I had written for Julian. We used the traditional vows, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. When I said the words, I looked directly into Alexander's dark eyes. There was no love there, but there was respect. There was an alliance. Do you have the rings? The priest asked, sweating profusely. Emma, who had sprinted down the aisle behind us, looking like she was having an out-of-body experience, numbly handed over my wedding band. But Alexander didn't have a ring for me. Without missing a beat, Alexander reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled off a heavy, custom-made platinum signet ring bearing the Cole family crest. He took my left hand. His fingers were warm and incredibly steady. With this ring, I thee wed, Alexander said, sliding the heavy platinum band onto my ring finger. It was too big, resting loosely against my knuckle, but the weight of it felt like armor. I now pronounce you husband and wife. The priest rushed out. You may kiss the bride. I hadn't thought about the kiss. A jolt of panic finally pierced my calm facade. But Alexander didn't hesitate. He pulled me flush against his chest, one hand sliding into the hair at the nape of my neck, tilting my head back. His mouth came down on mine. It wasn't a chaste, theatrical peck for the crowd. It was firm, possessive, and electric. A spark of genuine heat flared between us, stealing the breath from my lungs. When he finally pulled back, my lips were tingling and the ballroom erupted into a deafening roar of applause, gasps, and absolute chaos. Meanwhile, miles away at Mount Sinai Hospital, Julian sat in a plastic chair holding a sleeping Olivia's hand. The doctor had just told him it was a mild panic attack. Nothing serious. He smiled to himself, thinking about how understanding his sweet, docile Clara was being. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone to text me that he would be back at the hotel in an hour. Instead, his screen lit up with 30 missed calls from his mother and a breaking news alert from a society blog. Shocker at the plaza. Bride Clara Adams left at the altar by junior exec marries billionaire boss Alexander Cole instead. See the exclusive video. Julian dropped his phone. It hit the linoleum floor, shattering the screen much like the life he thought he had perfectly controlled. The kiss broke, but the electricity lingering in the air did not. Alexander kept his hand firmly on my lower back as we turned to face the crowd. The string quartet, bless their highly paid professionalism, immediately transitioned into an upbeat triumphant recessional march. We walked back down the aisle, the sea of bewildered faces parting for us. I could hear the frantic clicking of smartphone cameras. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was the social scandal of the decade. As we stepped out of the grand ballroom and into the private reception hall, the doors snapped shut behind us, muting the chaos. I finally let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I woke up in the bridal suite. You handled that exquisitely, Alexander noted, releasing my waist. He walked over to a silver tray of champagne flutes left by the catering staff and handed me one. Drink. You're paler than your dress. I took the glass, the crystal cold against my trembling fingers. Thank you. And thank you for playing along. Playing along? Alexander's dark eyebrows rose. He took a sip of his own champagne. Clara, I don't play. That was a legally binding ceremony performed by a licensed officiant in front of 300 witnesses. You are my wife. And starting Monday, my uncle's attempt to usurp my company will be officially dead in the water. Before I could respond, the heavy oak doors burst open. Eleanor Prescott stormed into the room, her face an ugly mottled purple. Emma was right on her heels, looking equal parts terrified and thrilled. What is the meaning of this? Eleanor shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She marched right up to me, raising a shaking manicured finger. Clara Adams, you little, how dare you make a mockery of my family? How dare you embarrass Julian like this? I didn't shrink back. In my past life, Eleanor's sharp tongue had kept me up at night, crying into my pillow, while Julian told me to just be the bigger person. I took a slow sip of my champagne. Your family made a mockery of itself. Eleanor, your son abandoned me at the altar for his childhood obsession. I simply improvised. Olivia was having a medical emergency. Eleanor spat, though her eyes darted nervously toward Alexander. Julian is a good, loyal man. You couldn't wait 1 hour. You had to throw yourself at his boss like a common gold digger. She turned to Alexander, her tone softening into a sickeningly sweet, desperate plea. Mr. Cole, please. This girl is hysterical. She manipulated you. We can get this annulled quietly. Alexander stepped between Eleanor and me. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Mrs. Prescott, Alexander said softly. It was a terrifying softness. If you ever raise your voice to my wife again, I will personally ensure that your husband's boutique investment firm faces an audit so aggressive it will leave you bankrupt by Christmas. Do we understand each other? Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls, the color draining entirely from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Security, Alexander called out, not breaking eye contact with the trembling woman. 2 massive men in black suits stepped out from the shadows of the corridor. Escort Mrs. Prescott and the rest of her family off the premises. They are no longer welcome at my wedding reception. You can't do this. Eleanor finally choked out as the guards flanked her. Julian will do absolutely nothing. Alexander interrupted, turning his back on her as if she were a mild annoyance. Enjoy your evening, Mrs. Prescott. As Eleanor was hauled away, sputtering indignities, Emma ran up to me and grabbed my shoulders. Clara. Oh my God. You actually did it. Are you okay? Are you insane? I love you. But holy hell. I laughed, the sound genuine and free. I'm fine, Emma. Better than fine. Meanwhile, outside the Plaza Hotel, a yellow taxi screeched to a halt. Julian threw a crumpled $50 bill at the driver and scrambled out into the humid New York night. He was sweating. His tie undone. His perfect hair messy. Olivia's emergency had, just as I knew it would, turned out to be indigestion and mild anxiety. The doctors had discharged her with a prescription for antacids. Julian had finally looked at his phone, seen the notifications, and panicked. He ran up the grand marble steps of the hotel, only to be met by a wall of private security. "Excuse me, let me through. I'm the groom," Julian demanded, trying to push past a bouncer who looked like a retired linebacker. "Sorry, sir. The Cole wedding is a private event. Invitation only," the bouncer rumbled, crossing his massive arms. "The Cole wedding? No. No. You don't understand. I'm Julian Prescott. That's my bride in there," Julian shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He could see the flashing lights of paparazzi starting to gather at the edge of the barricades. "Mr. Cole left strict instructions, Mr. Prescott," the head of security said, stepping forward with a clipboard. "You are permanently barred from the premises. I suggest you leave before we have you arrested for trespassing." Julian stumbled back, staring up at the glowing windows of the plaza. The reality was finally crashing down on him. He pulled out his phone, his hand shaking so badly he dropped it twice, and dialed my number. Inside the reception, my phone buzzed in my small clutch. I pulled it out. "Incoming call. Julian." I looked at the screen, a cold smile touching my lips, and hit decline. Then I blocked the number. The reception was a blur of expensive food, calculated conversations, and Alexander introducing me to New York's elite as if I had been his partner for years, not hours. We played our parts flawlessly. By the time we left the plaza in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, I was exhausted, my feet aching in my Jimmy Choo heels. The car glided smoothly through the neon-lit streets toward Billionaires Row. We pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper, taking a private elevator straight to the top floor. Alexander's penthouse was exactly what I expected, a minimalist masterpiece of floor-to-ceiling windows, dark marble, and modern art. It looked like a museum, not a home. "Make yourself comfortable," Alexander said, loosening his bow tie and tossing his suit jacket onto a sleek leather sofa. "There's a guest suite down the hall to the left. It has its own bathroom and a walk-in closet." "Thank you," I said, slipping out of my heels and sinking into one of the armchairs. I looked at the heavy platinum ring still dwarfing my left finger. "So, we did it." Alexander walked over to a built-in bar, pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25. He handed me one and sat on the sofa opposite me. "We did," he agreed, his dark eyes studying me intently over the rim of his glass. "My lawyers will draw up the formal post-nuptial agreement tomorrow. But we need to establish our own terms now. Honesty. Clara, why did you really do this? Don't give me the free agent speech. Prescott humiliated you." "Yes, but marrying me is nuclear retaliation." I stared into my amber drink. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him that I had died a miserable, broken woman because of Julian's slow-drip emotional abuse. I couldn't tell him about the icy windshield and the smell of my own blood. I spent 5 years shrinking myself so Julian could play the hero for Olivia. I was invisible. I decided I never want to be invisible again. And nobody ignores Alexander Cole's wife. Alexander sat in silence for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "I can respect that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, heavy black metal card, tossing it onto the glass coffee table between us. "Your new credit card, unlimited. Tomorrow, you will go to Bergdorf Goodman, Saks, wherever you please. You will buy a wardrobe fitting the wife of a CEO. The media is going to be watching you like a hawk. You need to look untouchable." I looked at the card. "I'm not a gold digger, Alexander. I didn't do this for your money." "I know," he replied smoothly. "If you were a gold digger, you would have demanded a settlement before walking down the aisle. This is an investment. You are the face of Cole Enterprises now. When we attend charity galas, board dinners, and press events, you represent me. Dress the part." He stood up, looking down at me. "The marriage lasts for 3 years. By then, my Uncle Richard will be entirely bought out. and my control over the board will be absolute. After 3 years, we divorce quietly, citing irreconcilable differences. You walk away with $20 million, the penthouse in Tribeca, and whatever you bought during the marriage. Do we have a deal? 20 million. My head spun, but I kept my face blank. Deal. Good night, Clara, he said, turning toward the master suite. Alexander, I called out. He stopped. I held up my left hand, the oversized signet ring catching the dim light. I'm going to need a ring that actually fits. He glanced at my hand, then back to my face. A jeweler is coming to the penthouse at 10 a.m. Sleep well, Mrs. Cole. The next 3 days were a whirlwind. Sunday was spent with the jeweler, sizing a stunning 5-carat emerald-cut diamond flanked by baguettes, elegant, icy, and undeniably expensive. Monday and Tuesday were spent executing Alexander's orders, with Emma by my side, who thoroughly enjoyed my newfound billionaire status. I purged my wardrobe of the sensible budget-friendly pastels Julian had preferred. I replaced them with sharp tailoring, rich jewel tones, Tom Ford power suits, and silk blouses. I was building my armor. By Wednesday morning, the media frenzy had reached a fever pitch. Every gossip column and business journal had covered the Plaza Phantom groom and the stunning power play by Alexander Cole. Julian miraculously hadn't shown up to my apartment, which I had sent movers to clear out on Monday. According to Emma, he had taken 3 days of sick leave to hide from the humiliation. But today was Thursday. Today, the honeymoon was over. Today, Julian had to return to the office. And so did I. Cole Enterprises occupied the top 20 floors of a glittering skyscraper in the financial district. The lobby was a sprawling expanse of white marble and security turnstiles. At 8:45 a.m., Julian Prescott walked through the revolving glass doors. He looked awful. His usual arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, paranoid shuffle. Dark circles bruised his under eyes. He kept his head down, scanning his badge to get through the turnstiles, ignoring the blatant stares and whispers of his colleagues. He honestly thought he could fix this. He had drafted a dozen emails to Alexander, begging for a meeting, claiming temporary insanity, claiming Olivia had threatened self-harm. He had called my phone 50 times from different numbers, leaving voicemails ranging from tearful apologies to furious demands. He stepped into the crowded elevator, pressing the button for the 45th floor, the junior executive suite. Did you see the post this morning? A woman in marketing whispered loudly to her friend. She looked incredible. I can't believe Prescott threw that away for a girl who fakes panic attacks. Julian's jaw clenched. He stared at the glowing numbers above the doors. Just get to the desk, he told himself. Keep your head down. Clara will crack eventually. She loves me. She's just throwing a tantrum. The elevator pinged at the 50th floor. The executive boardroom. Julian frowned. He hadn't pressed that button. Everyone off. A sharp, familiar voice commanded from the hallway. Executive suite is closed for the next hour. Take the next car. The other employees scrambled off, heads bowed in deference. Julian stood frozen. Standing in the elevator bay was Alexander Cole's executive assistant, a terrifying woman named Miriam. Mr. Prescott, Miriam said coldly. Mr. Cole expects you in the main boardroom. Now. Julian swallowed dryly. He stepped out of the elevator, his legs feeling like lead. This was it. The dressing down. He rehearsed his apologies as he walked down the hushed carpeted hallway toward the double glass doors of the boardroom. He pushed the doors open. Mr. Cole. Sir, I can explain everything. Julian started, his voice overly loud in the cavernous room. He stopped dead. Sitting at the head of the massive mahogany table was Alexander, looking immaculate in a charcoal pinstripe suit reviewing a tablet. But Alexander wasn't what stopped Julian's heart. Sitting to Alexander's right, sipping an espresso from a porcelain cup, was me. I wore a tailored crimson Alexander McQueen blazer over a black silk camisole, my hair blown out in loose expensive waves. The 5-carat diamond on my left hand caught the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, throwing fractured rainbows across the table. I didn't look like the sweet, accommodating girl who used to pack his lunches and iron his shirts. I looked like his boss. Clara, Julian breathed, all his rehearsed speeches vanishing from his brain. He took a step toward me, a mix of relief and anger flashing across his face. Clara, what the hell are you doing here? You need to come home. This joke has gone far enough. Alexander didn't even look up from his tablet. Sit down, Prescott. The quiet authority in Alexander's voice made Julian flinch, but his eyes remained locked on me. Sir, with all due respect, this is a private matter between me and my fiancée. Wife, I corrected, setting my espresso cup down. The clink of porcelain against the saucer echoed like a gunshot. The word you're looking for is wife, Julian. And seeing as I am married to the majority shareholder of this company, I thought it pertinent to sit in on this morning's personnel review. You can't be serious. Julian stammered, gripping the back of a leather chair. His face was turning a sickly shade of gray. You married him. You actually married him. Clara, I was gone for 20 minutes. You were gone forever. Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm. Just like you were gone on our anniversary when Olivia had a migraine. Just like you were gone on my birthday because Olivia's dog died. You made your choice. She was in the hospital. Julian shouted, slamming a hand on the chair. Have you no empathy? I went to make sure she wasn't dying. And you pulled this malicious, vindictive stunt to ruin my life. Bang! Alexander slapped his tablet flat onto the table. The sudden noise made Julian jump out of his skin. Alexander slowly stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, walking around the large table until he was standing directly in front of Julian. The height and sheer physical presence of the billionaire forced Julian to take a step back. Let me make something abundantly clear to you, Prescott, Alexander said, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet register. You will not raise your voice in my boardroom. You will not raise your voice to my wife. If you ever speak to her with anything less than absolute deference, I will personally throw you through that plate glass window. Julian was trembling now, his bravado entirely shattered. Mr. Cole. Sir, please, your quarterly numbers are abysmal, Alexander continued, seamlessly shifting from violent protector to ruthless CEO. Your attendance is a joke. You've missed 4 crucial client meetings in the last 6 months due to personal emergencies. I retained you only because your father was a friend of my late grandfather. But patience is not one of my virtues. I can do better, Julian pleaded, tears springing to his eyes. He looked at me, a desperate pathetic dog begging for scraps. Clara, please tell him I'm a hard worker. I need this job to pay for the mortgage. I felt nothing, no pity, no residual love, just the cold satisfaction of the universe finally balancing the scales. You don't need to pay the mortgage, Julian, I said smoothly. I broke the lease on the apartment yesterday. You have until Friday to get your things out of storage. Julian's mouth fell open. You evicted me. I moved on. I corrected. Alexander stepped back, crossing his arms. You are hereby terminated from Cole Enterprises effective immediately. Security is currently clearing out your desk. You will find your final severance package at the front desk downstairs. Do not ever step foot in this building again. You can't fire me for this, Julian yelled, panic completely taking over. This is wrongful termination. This is personal. It is entirely professional. Alexander replied coldly. You are incompetent. The fact that you are also a pathetic excuse for a man is merely a bonus. Miriam, the assistant, opened the boardroom doors. Behind her stood 2 large security guards. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Prescott to the lobby, Alexander ordered. As the guards grabbed Julian's arms, he fought back, twisting to look at me. His face was streaked with desperate tears. Clara, please. I love you. I'll cut off contact with Olivia. I swear. Just give me another chance. Clara. I sat perfectly still, my posture impeccable, watching the man who had caused my death in another life be dragged away like trash. Have a nice life, Julian, I said, right before the glass doors closed, cutting off his pathetic sobs. The boardroom was silent again. Alexander walked back to his seat, picking up his tablet as if nothing had happened. He glanced at me over the top of the screen. Satisfied, Mrs. Cole? He asked, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. I looked down at the massive diamond on my hand, then out the window at the sprawling Manhattan skyline. The game was just beginning, and I held all the best cards. For today, Mr. Cole, I replied, a matching smirk forming on my own face. For today. The news of Julian's spectacular termination from Cole Enterprises rippled through our social circle like a seismic shockwave. By Friday, my phone was a graveyard of blocked numbers and unread emails from mutual acquaintances, all desperate for the inside scoop. I ignored them all. I was too busy adjusting to the dizzying altitude of my new life. Alexander was a man of intense, terrifying focus. He treated our marriage like a high-stakes corporate merger. We had breakfast together in the penthouse, reading the Wall Street Journal in comfortable silence. And we attended high society dinners, where we played the fiercely private but deeply connected power couple. He never pushed for physical intimacy, but his public displays of affection, a hand on my waist, a lingering kiss on my temple for the cameras, were executed with devastating precision. But I knew the silence from Julian's camp wouldn't last. A wounded animal always lashes out. And Julian was currently backed into a very small, very poor corner. He had nowhere to go but Olivia's apartment. From what Emma managed to gather through the grapevine, the reality of living with her sick best friend had quickly shattered Julian's delusions. Olivia Jenkins wasn't a tragic, fragile heroine. She was a deeply narcissistic woman who thrived on the attention of unavailable men. With Julian suddenly unemployed, stripped of his trust fund access by a furious Eleanor Prescott, and sleeping on her velvet love seat, the novelty had worn off. He was no longer a prize. He was a liability. And Olivia hated liabilities. The collision course was set for the Robin Hood Foundation Gala, New York's premier philanthropic event held at the Javits Center. Alexander had purchased a platinum table, signaling to the city's elite that Cole Enterprises was thriving under his undisputed leadership. I spent 4 hours preparing. I wore a custom plunging emerald green Oscar de la Renta gown that clung to my curves like liquid glass. My hair swept up to display a blinding diamond necklace Alexander had casually gifted me that morning. You look, Alexander paused as I stepped into the living room, his dark eyes sweeping over me, lingering on the exposed line of my collarbone. For the first time, his mask of polite indifference slipped, replaced by a raw predatory heat. Formidable. You look formidable, Clara. That is the goal, Mr. Cole, I murmured, accepting the arm he offered me. The gala was a chaotic sea of flashing bulbs, red carpets, and billionaires. We navigated the press line with practiced ease. But as we stepped into the grand hall surrounded by the likes of real estate magnates and politicians, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Alexander, I said quietly, keeping my smile fixed for the cameras. 10 o'clock. Alexander's gaze shifted. Standing near the ice sculpture, looking entirely out of place in an off-the-rack red dress, was Olivia Jenkins. And trailing behind her, looking utterly miserable in a poorly tailored suit, was Julian. How did they get in? Alexander murmured, his jaw tightening. Tickets are $50,000 a head. Olivia's uncle is a mid-level caterer for the event staff. I recalled from my past life. She must have pulled a massive favor to get them on the floor as supervisors, though she clearly ditched the uniform. Before Alexander could summon security, Olivia spotted us. Her eyes, normally wide and doe-like, hardened into twin daggers. She whispered something to Julian, who turned pale, but she was already marching toward us, dragging him by the wrist. The surrounding crowd, sensing the impending drama, subtly quieted down, edging closer to eavesdrop. Clara, Olivia said loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the string quartet. She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms. She looked me up and down, a sneer twisting her pretty features. I must say I didn't expect you to show your face in polite society so soon. Not after what you did to poor Julian. I let out a soft, melodic laugh. It was a sound I had practiced. Olivia, I'm surprised to see you out of bed. Wasn't your heart condition acting up last week? The doctors at Mount Sinai must be miracle workers. A few socialites nearby snickered. Olivia flushed angrily. Don't you dare patronize me. You manipulated a tragic situation to steal a billionaire. You threw away 5 years with Julian just because he cared about my health. I threw away 5 years with Julian because he proved himself to be a spineless coward who abandons his commitments. I corrected, my voice cold and loud enough for the reporters lingering near the edge of the room to hear. And looking at him now, trailing behind you like an obedient dog, I am profoundly grateful for his cowardice. Julian stepped forward, his face burning with humiliation. Clara, please, stop this. You've ruined my career. You got me blacklisted from every major firm in Manhattan. Isn't that enough? You have your money. Just leave us alone. Leave you alone. I raised an eyebrow. Julian, you crashed my charity gala. You approached me. I haven't thought about you since I watched security drag you out of my husband's office. Alexander, who had remained silent, finally stepped into the fray. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer gravity of his presence made Olivia physically take a step back. Mr. Prescott, Alexander said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I warned you about approaching my wife. She's a fraud. Olivia suddenly shrieked, losing her temper as she pointed a shaking finger at Alexander. You think she loves you? She's using you. She's a vindictive, calculating gold digger. And the moment she secures your money, she'll leave you, too. Julian knows her better than anyone. The entire room went dead silent. The string quartet missed a beat. Alexander looked at Olivia as if she were a piece of gum stuck to his expensive Italian leather shoes. He reached out and took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. His grip was warm, solid, and utterly unyielding. Miss Jenkins, Alexander said smoothly, his eyes locking onto hers. My wife's motivations are entirely her own. But let me assure you of one thing, she is worth every single penny. And if you ever attempt to slander her in public again, I will have the elite legal team at Cravath, Swain and more sue you in so many defamation lawsuits. Your grandchildren will be paying my legal fees. Security. Within seconds, 4 towering guards materialized from the crowd. These two are trespassing, Alexander ordered. Remove them through the service elevator. As the guard seized Olivia's arms, she began to scream, her carefully constructed fragile persona completely dissolving into an ugly thrashing tantrum. Julian didn't fight. He just stared at me, his eyes hollow, finally realizing the absolute finality of what he had lost. I turned away before they even reached the doors, lifting my champagne flute to clink against Alexander's. To public relations, I smiled. Alexander's eyes were dark, burning with an emotion I couldn't quite name. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear, sending a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. To my formidable wife, he whispered. The gala incident only cemented our status as New York's most untouchable power couple. But behind the closed doors of the penthouse, the real war was brewing. Alexander's uncle, Richard Cole, was not a man who surrendered easily. Richard owned 40% of Cole Enterprises. Alexander owned 40%. The remaining 20% belonged to the late grandfather's estate, held in a trust that would only transfer to Alexander upon his marriage before his 33rd birthday. If the marriage was proven fraudulent or annulled before the transfer cleared the probate courts, the 20% would default to Richard, giving him a 60% majority and the power to oust Alexander entirely. It was late Tuesday night. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. I found Alexander in his study surrounded by stacks of financial dossiers, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked exhausted. Richard is stalling the probate judge, Alexander said, rubbing his temples as I set a mug of black coffee on his desk. He's hired private investigators. They are digging into your past, looking for any shred of evidence that I paid you to marry me. They won't find any, I said calmly, taking a seat in the leather chair across from him. There were no wire transfers, no shady meetings. It was a spontaneous decision. Spontaneous decisions don't hold up well under federal scrutiny. Clara, Alexander sighed, leaning back in his chair. Richard is building a narrative that you are a hired actress. If he gets a judge to freeze the asset transfer pending a full investigation, he can call an emergency board meeting and vote me out as CEO while my shares are locked. I frowned, my mind racing. In my past life. Julian had told me snippets of corporate gossip. He had mentioned Richard Cole once. It was a year after my original wedding. Julian had been complaining about a massive scandal at his firm. What was it? I closed my eyes, forcing the memories of my miserable past life to surface. Julian sitting at the kitchen table, drinking cheap beer, complaining about the executives. The old man got caught. Julian's voice echoed in my memory. Richard Cole, stashing company funds in offshore shell companies in the Caymans. They found the ledger hidden in his country club locker. Stupid old bastard. My eyes snapped open. Alexander, I said, leaning forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. What if we don't play defense? What if we completely destroy Richard before he can even file the injunction? Alexander raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You said Richard handles the international logistics division, right? I asked, my voice quickening with adrenaline. Has anyone ever audited the freight contracts for the South American routes? Alexander's brow furrowed. No. That division has been under Richard's exclusive control for a decade. The board trusts his numbers. Why? Because I think he's skimming. I lied smoothly, framing my past life knowledge as a brilliant deduction. Think about it. If he's desperate enough to hire private investigators to spy on our marriage, he's desperate for absolute control. He needs the CEO title to bury something. Check the ledger at his locker at the Westchester Country Club. I bet you'll find a paper trail leading straight to the Cayman Islands. Alexander stared at me in stunned silence. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the glass. If you are wrong, Alexander said slowly, and I accuse my uncle of embezzlement without proof, the board will have me committed and strip my title immediately. I am not wrong, I said, holding his gaze with unflinching certainty. Trust me, Alexander. Send your most discreet fixer to Westchester. Alexander studied my face. He was searching for a crack, a sign of doubt. Finding none, he picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. Marcus, I need you to take a trip to Westchester tonight. Break into locker 402. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in agonizing tension. Alexander barely slept. I stayed by his side, ordering takeout, reviewing the legal contingencies, and pacing the hardwood floors. In those quiet, grueling hours, the lines of our business arrangement began to blur. One night, I fell asleep on the sofa in the study, exhausted from reading legal briefs. I woke up to find a heavy cashmere blanket draped over me, and Alexander sitting on the edge of the coffee table, just watching me. The cold, ruthless CEO was gone. In the dim light of the desk lamp, he looked vulnerable. Why are you doing this? He asked softly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. You have your ring. You have the black card. You could be in Paris right now waiting out the 3 years. Why are you fighting in the trenches with me? I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I looked at the man who had given me the power to rewrite my tragic ending. Because we are a team, Alexander, I said truthfully, and I don't abandon my partners. He reached out, his warm fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch sent a profound aching warmth blooming in my chest. You are a terrifyingly brilliant woman, Clara Cole. I think I am entirely out of my depth with you. Before I could reply, his phone buzzed violently on the desk. Alexander snatched it up, putting it on speaker. Marcus, tell me you have it. I have it, boss. Marcus's gritty voice crackled through the speaker. 2 physical ledgers. It's a bloodbath. Alexander. He's been skimming millions off the top and routing it through shell companies in Grand Cayman for 5 years. The proof is undeniable. Alexander locked eyes with me, a slow predatory smile spreading across his face. Bring them to the penthouse, Alexander ordered. He hung up the phone and looked at me, his eyes burning with triumph and something dangerously close to affection. Checkmate. But Richard had one final desperate move to play. The next morning, an emergency board meeting was summoned. Richard had formally filed a grievance claiming my marriage to Alexander was a sham, demanding a suspension of Alexander's voting rights. And his star witness, Julian Prescott. The atmosphere in the executive boardroom of Cole Enterprises was suffocating. 12 board members, all elderly men in dark suits, sat around the mahogany table with grave expressions. At the far end sat Richard Cole, a silver-haired man with a perpetually smug expression. Standing nervously behind him was Julian. Julian looked haggard, clutching a manila folder to his chest like a shield. The double doors swung open and Alexander and I walked in. I wore a sharp white Saint Laurent power suit. I was no longer the blushing bride. I was the executioner. Alexander pulled out a chair for me at his right hand, then took his seat at the head of the table. "Uncle Richard," Alexander said smoothly, resting his hands on the table. "I understand you called this emergency session. Please enlighten the board as to why we are wasting our Thursday morning." Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket. "It pains me to do this, Alexander, but the integrity of Cole Enterprises is paramount. I have reason to believe that your marriage to Miss Adams is a fraudulent arrangement executed solely to trigger the inheritance clause in your grandfather's will. As such, I am petitioning the board to freeze your inherited shares and temporarily instate me as interim CEO." A murmur of shock rippled through the board members. "And your proof?" Alexander asked, his voice deadpan. "My proof is standing right here," Richard sneered, gesturing to Julian. "Mr. Prescott was engaged to this woman. On the day of their wedding, she abandoned him at the altar and married you, a man she had never spoken to within 20 minutes. Furthermore, Mr. Prescott has a recorded conversation proving her malicious, opportunistic nature." Julian stepped forward, his hands shaking as he placed a small digital recorder on the table. "I went to see Clara at her new penthouse 3 days ago," Julian lied, his voice cracking. "She didn't know I was recording. She admitted everything." He pressed play. A voice that sounded vaguely like mine crackled through the speakers. "Of course I don't love him, Julian. He's paying me $20 million to play his wife. Once the 3 years are up, I'm taking the money and coming back to you. Just be patient." The board erupted into chaotic shouting. I sat perfectly still. It was a deep fake. A cheap, AI-generated audio clip Olivia had likely cobbled together from old voicemails I had left Julian years ago. It was pathetic. But in a room full of paranoid billionaires, it was enough to light the match. "This is an outrage," one board member shouted. "Fraud. Call the legal department," cried another. Richard looked triumphant. Julian looked terrified but vindicated. Alexander calmly picked up a heavy crystal water glass and slammed it down on the table. The sharp crack silenced the room instantly. "Are we quite finished?" Alexander asked. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He turned to Richard. "Uncle, if you are going to commit corporate treason, you should at least employ better audio engineers. My wife has not left my side for more than 10 minutes in the last week. She certainly didn't entertain her pathetic ex-fiancé at our home. You can deny it all you want, Alexander," Richard spat. "The board will launch an investigation. Your shares are frozen. Step down." "I will do no such thing," Alexander replied. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out 2 thick leather-bound ledgers. He tossed them onto the center of the table. They landed with a heavy, damning thud. Richard's smug expression vanished. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. What are those?" Richard stammered, taking a step back. "Those," Alexander said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "are the original handwritten ledgers detailing your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They outline exactly how you have embezzled over $45 million from the South American Logistics Division over the past 5 years." The boardroom descended into absolute pandemonium. Board members were scrambling out of their seats, lunging for the ledgers. "That's a lie," Richard shrieked, panic clawing at his throat. "They are forged. He planted them." "The FBI doesn't think so," I spoke up, my voice cutting through the noise like a newly sharpened blade. I stood up, smoothing the front of my white suit. "While you were busy fabricating audio clips with your desperate new friend, my husband and I had our legal team hand over a copy of those ledgers to federal prosecutors at 5 o'clock this morning. There is a warrant out for your arrest, Richard." Right on cue, the heavy doors of the boardroom were pushed open. 2 FBI agents in dark windbreakers flanked the doorway. "Richard Cole," the lead agent asked. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of grand larceny, wire fraud, And corporate embezzlement. Richard collapsed back into his chair, gasping for air like a dying fish. Julian, realizing the absolute catastrophe he had just willingly walked into, tried to quietly slip toward the back door. Agents, I called out, pointing a manicured finger at Julian. That man just presented a fabricated audio recording in an attempt to blackmail the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and defraud the board of directors. I believe that makes him an accessory to corporate extortion. Julian froze. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it almost looked comical. Clara. No. I didn't know. Richard forced me. Olivia made the tape. I didn't mean it. Julian babbled hysterically as an agent grabbed his arm, pulling his hands behind his back. Please. Clara. I loved you. You loved having a servant. Julian. I said, my voice empty of any rage. I was finally truly free of him. Enjoy federal prison. I hear they don't accommodate panic attacks. As Julian and Richard were hauled out of the room in handcuffs, the remaining board members stared at Alexander and me in terrified awe. If there are no further questions regarding the validity of my marriage or my absolute control of this company, Alexander said, adjusting his cuffs, this meeting is adjourned. The men scrambled out of the room like frightened children, leaving Alexander and me alone in the sprawling, silent boardroom. I let out a long, shuddering breath, feeling the last remnants of my past life trauma evaporate into the air. I had done it. I had rewritten my destiny. I was alive. I was wealthy. And the people who destroyed me were nothing but ash. I turned to Alexander. He was watching me with an intensity that made my pulse race. He walked slowly around the table until he was standing right in front of me. He reached out gently, taking my left hand. He ran his thumb over the 5-carat diamond he had bought me. The 3-year contract. Alexander murmured, his dark eyes locking onto mine. Yes. I breathed, my heart pounding. I'm breaking it, he said softly. Panic flared in my chest for a fraction of a second. What? Why? Alexander stepped closer, wrapping his strong arms around my waist and pulling me flush against his chest. He lowered his head until his lips were a breath away from mine. Because $20 million is an insult for a woman who just saved my empire, Alexander said fiercely. And because I have absolutely no intention of ever letting you go. I don't want a business partner, Clara. I want my wife. For real. Forever. Tears genuine and hot pricked the corners of my eyes. In my past life, I had begged for scraps of affection. In this life, I had demanded respect. And in return, I had found an equal. I reached up, tangling my fingers in his dark hair. I think that's the smartest business decision you've ever made, Mr. Cole. Alexander smiled. A rare breathtaking sight. Right before he kissed me, there were no cameras, no board members, no audience to perform for. It was just us, two ruthless, unstoppable forces finally colliding. The universe had given me a second chance on my wedding day, and I hadn't just survived it. I had conquered it.